Great. Hello, everyone. As Jake said, we're going to speak to Matt for a bit, for about half an hour or so. Matt's going to share something from the Bible, a verse that's helped him. And then there's chance for Q&A to ask Matt some questions. So as we go through and talk to Matt, and you've got a question, maybe jot it down, and there's a chance later to ask him. So, hello, Matt.
Hello, Andy.
Hello.
Hello. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Just tell us how we know each other. Just fill everyone else in.
Yeah, we've known each other for. Is it possible it's 20 years, something like that? We've done. We first met doing summer camp. We were probably both sort of Christian holidays for teenagers that they can bring their friends on. And yeah, I remember meeting you one year, and you were particularly good at table tennis. I shouldn't really be saying that because you're probably still quite good, and that's slightly annoying. But you.
I don't mention it. I don't mention it.
You don't mention it. Okay. There was a lot of table tennis being played, and then just over the years, these sorts of things, when you do them together, you just get to know people really quickly. So, yeah, we've been friends since then, and have had a number of holidays together, and our wives, we got married roughly the same time, and we've both got two children of fairly similar age. So you're not going to be able to shake me off is the situation.
So, I wouldn't want to.
Okay, thank you. That was great.
So Matt, just tell us a bit about your upbringing.
Yeah, sure. I live in the suburbs now in Bromley. I think that's the suburbs, isn't it? Some people call it Kent, but it's basically suburban London. And yeah, and I grew up in suburban London on the northwest side of London, near Watford. And yeah, so I don't know what people from the suburbs aren't particularly interesting. I don't think I'm a particularly interesting person. I grew up I always wished I'd either lived in the centre of the city or up in out in the country. But I grew up in suburban London. It was a very stable and happy upbringing. My mum's Australian. She had met my dad in England, and my dad was in the Navy. And so, but he'd done most of the travelling by that stage that I was born. So we just grew up in Watford, went to school there. A very stable, loving family. Very little sort of experience of suffering or death, really. Grandparents died in Australia, but yeah. So just that was upbringing. Older sister, younger brother. And then I did A levels, went off to university. I went to university and just loved playing sport, and that was sort of that was what I was into. I was basically a bit like a dog. I'd chase any ball of any description going. I'd kick it, hit it, golf, football, tennis, rugby. So yeah, sport was sport, or it still is in a different form, has been a big part of my life. So that was upbringing, and then I moved to Bromley as a teacher. Initially, I was an English teacher for a few years. In fact, I taught for a year in Allane's school in Dulwich. So I lived on, what's the road called? Is it Townley Road?
Townley Road, yeah.
Yeah. I lived there. I lived there for a year. So I taught 2 years down in Orpington, and then 1 year in Allane's as an English teacher. And then I started working for the church I'm at now as a youth worker, and did that.
Can I just say, Matt, you once came to visit Allane's, and you hadn't been there for about 6 years.
Right.
And you'd only been there yourself for a short amount of time. You walked in, and it was as if the second coming had taken place. People swooning at your feet. It was remarkable.
Ben, I thought you were still on your fortnight call. Ben, isn't it time for you to get back there? Yeah, no, it was good to. That was Ben, wasn't it? I can't see on the screen.
That was Ben.
Yeah. You're still there, are you?
yeah. Should we talk about it now?
No,
No.
no. So that, yeah, a year there, a happy year there. But I then started working for a church, and then I was ordained in the Church of England. So I'm an ordained church minister now. Does that? Sorry, that was a rather long answer.
No, that fills us in. And then
That covers the ground.
And then, so just tell us how your world changed. 2013, 8 years ago.
Yeah, so that's the title for this evening: How to Cope When Your World Changed. And as I said, life was a very stable life up to my mid 30s. I took a job as a curate at an Anglican church in the centre of London. I was finally not in the suburbs. I was in the centre, living in Fulham, cycling up to Mayfair, pretty much past Buckingham Palace. It was just, life was great. Life was really good. I was single at that stage, and lots of disposable time, and it was great. And then things changed very dramatically, from stable to just everything was thrown up in the air. On a holiday in 2013, so actually 8 years ago, things changed on the 23rd of February, so that's 2 days ago, eight years ago. And holidays had always been sort of very active for me: games on the beach, walking the Pyrenees, windsurfing in Italy, those sorts of holidays. And I went to the Scottish Highlands with you, among others. So it was you, 3 other friends, was it Kay, Ted, Rachel? It was the 5 of us, wasn't it? We rented a place up there, and we probably went on the Saturday. It was a lodge right up in the Highlands, and we planned to just walk and mountain bike and stuff like that. And we'd had a few days of doing that. Is that what you remember? We went for hikes, didn't we? It was brilliant.
Lovely walks around Lochs.
Really brilliant time. It was brilliant. Sunny, snow on the ground. February half-term holiday.
Yeah, it was.
And on the Wednesday, you'll remember we went for an amazing walk around this beautiful loch, Loch Mick. And we'd walked around that. It was crystal clear, snow on the hills, a brilliant day of hiking. And we'd come home, we'd had dinner, and I can remember pretty much the precise time. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, because I looked at my clock, and suddenly, you and I were sharing a room that night, and suddenly I woke up with just searing and sudden back pain. It was agony. I couldn't sleep. I think I crept upstairs. You might have been aware, and I was just crouched on the floor for the rest of that night, just in pain. And I assumed that it was muscular, although I knew it felt really painful, but I thought I'd slipped a disc or something like that. We'd been carrying a rucksack. It was that sort of thing. I'd not had pain like it, but I had no framework for what it was. And the next day you all got up, and I couldn't really take part in what was going on. I remember we went to learn fly fishing, didn't we?
Didn't catch a thing.
Didn't catch a thing. And you were all in your waders, walking up and down. I mean, it was great fun. And I was just standing on the bank, and I just had to keep moving because of the pain. And I never did. How's your fly fishing career taken off since then?
It's not great.
Not great. Okay. Fine. So that day was a write-off, and the next couple of days I think we set up a sofa bed in the living room in the lodge, and I just basically lay there for a couple of days. And we went to see the doctor up there, and he asked various questions. He wondered if it was a perforated lung, because I was struggling to breathe, mainly because of the pain. And he gave me strong painkillers, which helped sort of suppress the pain. And I don't know, do you remember anything? I mean, those are my memories. Do you remember anything before we set off for home from that time? That was the case, wasn't it? I was just lying.
You were just in the sofa bed in the lounge for a couple of days. And I remember you going to late night A&E and coming back.
Yeah.
Um,
And so basically, it was a Friday. He said if it gets worse, it was the GP went to, not A&E. He said if it gets worse, go to A&E. And it hadn't got worse, I guess, because of the painkillers. And it was Friday. I was like, let's just get back to London. I'm sure we'll sort it out when we get there. I can see a physio if I need to. And so we set off. It was a long journey back on the Saturday, and we got out at various service stations. And it was when we got to Stoke-on-Trent, which, to my shame, I couldn't have put on a map at that point. That when we got out at the service station, then my legs were wobbly. And I had to be supported probably by you or others, and to get into the service station. At that point, just a few short conversations with you and the others, we decided. I was struggling to walk, and something wasn't right. Something significant wasn't right, and so we made the right decision at that point to go straight to A&E, which was half an hour away from the services. And we got there, and by that stage, I'm not sure I could even walk all of the way into A&E, and they brought a wheelchair out to wheel me in. And basically, over the next 4 or 5 hours, as we sat there, my legs basically froze in front of me. I was sitting on the bed, and my legs just sort of froze like that. It was just complete paralysis, just slowly over that time. I could move my leg a bit, and then slowly just stopped. And medics were coming and tapping on my legs and sticking things sort of in them and saying, "Can you feel that?" And increasingly, the answer was, "No, I can't actually feel that anymore." And it's the first I've been interviewed like this before, but I've not done it with someone who was there. So you could even probably fill in things that I can't remember from that, because it's pretty hazy. But I don't remember. I didn't lose it. I don't remember panicking. I was strangely very, very calm about it, because it happened so gradually, and I didn't know what was going on. But I don't know. Anything you can throw in?
I don't think I was with you in A&E, actually. I think because Ted is a doctor and Kate is physio. I think I left the medical stuff to them.
We were in 2 cars anyway, weren't we?
Yeah.
Right. So then that afternoon they did an MRI scan, and they spotted that I had what turned out to be a freak abscess at level T8. I didn't know much about the spine at all, but your thoracic spine is this area here, and 8 is the 8th vertebrae, which is about there. And so it was nothing that I'd done. No one's ever got to the bottom of how it came about. The questions they asked were things like, did you swim in a Scottish loch with an open wound? No. Do you inject drugs? No. Are you HIV positive? No. And that, those are the questions that they asked in the hospital. And they explained that there'd been some pressure put on my spinal cord, and that I needed emergency surgery that night. And I remember when they talked about that pressure had been put on my spinal cord, I remember thinking, this sounds a bit like a very serious trapped nerve. And what they're going to do is they'll relieve the pressure, and then everything will sort of unravel. And that's how I was approaching it. I can remember saying to someone in the first day or so, please just let work know that I'm just going to need a couple of days off. I didn't know it was a life-changing injury really, or that it was going to be 6 months in hospital in the end. But that's what I guess that's why I was fairly calm. I think I can put it down to that. And I know people were praying as well. My family arrived that night, some before the operation. My parents the next morning from London. And the distance over those months after that was very hard. They were brilliantly supportive, unbelievably. So shall I keep going, Andy? Is that
keep going, because then they operated.
Yeah, so that's right. They operated that night. There was a neurosurgeon who was a locum who was available, which was, it was a weekend. Those of you who've been in hospital, weekends are just the worst times to be in hospital. The teams are much smaller. So the fact that there was a surgeon who was on hand, able to do it was amazing. But yeah, a couple of scenes then from the next couple of days just really stand out as, I guess, the low points of what turned out to be, life-changing. With the first one was, I can remember the scene the next morning. My parents had arrived by now, and the surgeon, there was in the room, and the medical team arrives, sort of 3 or 4 people with clipboards and stethoscopes, and my parents were the other side of the room, and my brother, I think, and they were all gathered around my feet, which had sort of blankets and bandages on them, and they unraveled my feet, and it was one of those sort of very dramatic moments when everyone's, you got about 8 pairs of eyes just trained on your feet, including your own. And he said, could you try to just wiggle your toes? And, I tried, and there was just nothing. There was no, I was trying everything in my head. There's no movement at all. And I thought this can't be happening. And I could tell from, I'm not sure the wisdom of doing it in front of so many people, because it was very dramatic. We could have done it on the quiet when no one was around. But I could tell that he was hoping for more. I was too, and I could tell that he was surprised. He had hoped for more, and that was a real sort of kidney punch, because I had thought it will all unravel. This operation will do it. That was a really hard moment for me and for friends and everyone. And it dawned on me that this is serious. I think the other scene that stands out was just, I don't know when it was, you lose track of things, but one of the next few nights with the surgeon, who was a lovely, lovely man, Greek man, and he was standing at the foot of the bed. It was in the early hours of the night, and he was there with his clipboard, and the beeps in hospital, those of us who spent time in hospital, they're just sort of incessant beeps, and I thought I've got to know what the prognosis is, and I've got to ask him. And so I said, Mr. Psarakis, do you think that I'll be able to run again? And medics are very careful about this, and he said there's some hope that you'll walk again, but there's complexity to what that might look like, and I think you need to prepare for significant life change. Life's going to be very different for you now, and that probably marked the lowest moment. I think I was on my own, and he left, and I was alone in the room, and all I could do was really look up at the ceiling, because I was sort of just lying on my back, and I let out what was a confused and very raw prayer, including some tears and shouting and some words that you won't find in the Bible, but also things like, why God, and where are you, God, and are you there, God, and what are you doing, which you might be, which are in the Bible. For those of us who aren't used to Christian things, they are. People in the Bible say that sort of thing to God in the Psalms, and God doesn't shut that sort of conversation down, so to speak. But it was all directed to God at that time, and so that was the story, I guess, to the lowest point. We could pick up the story in a bit, but that was that first 3 or 4 days, which were
And can I just wind the clock back a bit? So you worked for a church, so I'm assuming you had been a Christian at this point.
Yeah.
Tell us, like, when you became a Christian.
Yeah, I know. I was a Christian. I'd given talks on suffering. I think 2 months before that, I'd given a talk on suffering, and I'd finished it, with a very dramatic quote from a lady who uses a wheelchair. And and didn't cross my mind that I'd ever have to use one myself, which is how it's turned out. So as I said, a loving home, a Christian home, and I'd heard about Jesus at church as I grew up. And I think the way I describe how I became a Christian is that at school I was Mr. Effort Prize. If I ever got a prize, it wasn't for brilliance. It was just for, just trying hard. That, apart from one time when they mixed it up and they announced that I was top of the class, and this guy called Guy Winter, who was the genius of the class, that he had got the effort prize, and I was, I sat down, I was very surprised, and then there was a tap on the shoulder from one of the teachers saying they got it wrong and they swapped it back. Anyway, that's the closest I'm still recovering from that now. Yeah, but that was the so Mr. Effort Prize, Mr. Try Hard, and I thought that's what I had to do with God: try hard, turn over a new leaf, be a better version of myself, get to heaven, get enough good boy points, avoid enough bad boy points, and that was kind of what I was living with. And at some point in my teenage years, I heard someone explain the Christian good news very clearly. I must have heard it from my parents and others, but at some point it just struck me between the eyes that God wouldn't have bothered to send his son to die on the cross if trying hard was going to be good enough. He just wouldn't have bothered. He would have said, well, you just try hard and you'll be fine. But that was that came home to me, that I needed forgiveness, that Jesus had provided that forgiveness on the cross, that if I turned to him and trusted him, I could be forgiven, and I could have a fresh start, and I could have the hope of eternal life. And at that time in my teenage years, I turned and trusted, and was overjoyed to discover that God would accept me as his forgiven child, and that I was in a relationship. And there were bumps along the way, but I was facing all of this as a Christian who'd I guess thought a bit about suffering, and but wasn't, in loads of ways, wasn't prepared for it, but in some ways really was, because I'd had to think about it a bit. So yeah.
And so you're lying in a hospital bed in Stoke-on-Trent. How did those truths that kind of brought you to trust in Jesus, how did they kick in at that point? Or can you remember what you were thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I think the very first thing was that truth that the God of the Bible, in a sense, gives us permission to for life. Not the expectation isn't that life is going to be a bed of roses, and that it's okay to express that. So the Psalms were a great comfort, that in effect God says in the Psalms, you may need to use some of these words in life. That was a sort of liberating thing. Whereas if I just push it the other way, if there is no God, and secular atheism is all there is, if there is no God, then this life is just as it is. Things happen, nature red in tooth and claw, the strong eat the weak. And so the question why, what's going on, the expectation that things should be different is stripped away. It's just a non-question. So for a start, just finding myself living in a worldview as a Christian where it's right to say this world is broken and fallen. What's going on? I long for something better than this. Like the Christian worldview plays all of that on side. So, and the expectation is that this world is fallen. There is something better to come. So that was a start. Maybe the second thing I might just say, that you said I could share a verse at the end, might just save that for later, which was the cross of Jesus. But the resurrection of Jesus, I think, became more precious to me than it ever was. I'd always, since becoming a Christian, believed that Jesus died and that he didn't stay dead, but he rose physically in history. But I went back to basics in those early weeks in hospital, and since, when I came out in the year after, I just read a number of books again on the resurrection to, I guess, just deepen my conviction that it really happened, that people saw it happen, wrote it down early in history, were prepared die for what they said they saw, that it's the best fit explanation, an accredited fact of history. So that, there's a man called John Chapman who was a Christian minister in Australia, and he always he would say that sometimes he hit a low point in his life, and he would get himself to the side of the bed, and he'd say, John Chapman Chapo, he'd say, he'd wonder why should I get going in the day? Things are hard. And he'd say, Chapo, have you had any new evidence in the last 24 hours that the resurrection didn't happen? And and he'd go, no, I haven't. I still believe it happened. And he'd say, well, get on and keep going. And I think that's the effect that the resurrection had for me. That there was nothing that persuaded me that the resurrection hadn't happened or hasn't happened since. And if you're looking in on this and you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, I say that's the place to go. Just read one of the eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus. And and again, for those of us who maybe think we're in a patch where there's not much suffering at the moment, we know it will come. So it's a good opportunity just to put down our roots and say, if this happened, then this life isn't everything. If this happened, then there's a world to come that Jesus promises, where even if we miss out on things in this life, the best is yet to come. And there is a physical world without tears, death, without viruses like coronavirus, and without wheelchairs. And that was just a massive foundation for how I was to face the next 8 years. We can talk about it in a bit, there are challenges, there are things I still find hard and sad, but I live with more hope than I think I did 8 years ago, because I guess I'm forced to engage with the reality that there is a new creation to come, and I think about it more, and I'm more excited about it than I was before, I think. So that has been the big thing, and that is just a truth from outside of me that has strengthened me. So I'm not particularly by nature optimistic character. I've had struggles with depression and anxiety in the past, but this is a truth, a person that has strengthened me to face it. So the story here isn't Matt's a really optimistic, positive guy who's faced sort of disability. So I'm witching on.
That's fine. So you're there, you're at your lowest point, as you said. The doctor said prepare for significant life change.
Yeah.
And just tell us what happened next, and maybe take us up to present day.
Yeah. So I spent 2 months in that hospital in Stoke-on-Trent, basically in the one bed there, in that room. Lots of people visiting, my parents staying with people that they were put in touch with nearby or in the Premier Inn around the corner. That was very hard for them in those sort of winter months. And during that time, I wasn't particularly well. I had pneumonia. And so I didn't really get out of bed at all. And so when I was well enough to, the leg muscles had wasted away anyway. But I then was transferred to Stoke Mandeville, which is a hospital near Aylesbury, about an hour northwest of Watford. So an hour from where my parents were, which is an amazing provision. It's a spinal unit, a specialist spinal unit. Not everyone gets to go to a place like that. I did. I got to go to one which had a real history. It was the home of the Paralympics. It had a real pedigree of sort of people playing sports. So lots of ball sports. And now, I was back to chasing lots of different shaped balls, but learning to do so in a wheelchair and surrounded by other people who are learning similar things. And strangely, it was a very sad place, lots of broken bodies and also lots of people in worse situations than me, which is one of the things that one says to oneself in those times. I'm not as bad as that guy over there who can't use his arms. And you do find yourself saying that, and the guys who can't use their arms are saying, yeah, but at least that guy over there has to drive his wheelchair using his chin. So it was a strange experience. It was positive in lots of ways. I picked up wheelchair tennis became the main sport that I've played since. But I was there for 4 months, and it was a very focused time. Oh, eventually I was able to stand. So when I put enough muscle bulk on, it became clear that I had some muscle function, but my legs still remain partial sensation. I can't really feel them, so I don't quite know where I am, which means that balance is hard, and my muscles are affected. So they're sort of, the word is, well, their spasticity is very high, so they're very tight. They don't move quickly enough to really walk that far. So I use some walking sticks. They help me to learn how to walk again with walking sticks. You move through a Zimmer frame and then walking sticks and other things. But eventually I was able to do that. And then I left in the August. So it'd been February to August, really, I guess in a form of lockdown. I remember being very scared to go out into the outside world, a bit like, lots of people in COVID after lockdown will be a bit scared as we all emerge. And I certainly felt that, having been institutionalized. But yeah, so that was that. Then I moved back away from central London and down to Bromley to restart life and find out get some part-time work going. And yeah, so that's the sort of story of disability. I still use a wheelchair.
I think we've got
most of the time. Oh yeah,
We've shared some pictures. This is mode of transport. Just talk us through these things.
Yeah, so what's that? Top left, I was given a hand bike, so I cycle using a hand bike. So just using my arms, lying down. It's great. It's good. It's good fun. Bottom left is my trusty mobility scooter, which maxes out at, I think, 4 miles an hour. And is a bit of a liability in a shopping centre, but it's quite fun, and it's just quite a safe way of getting around. So I use that that's my commute. That's me outside church, the building I'm in now.
I enjoy having a go on it.
Yeah, people do. My daughter loves it. I mean, kids who are 3 and 4 think it's the coolest thing they've ever seen. So there we go. So that's good. I've got various other things. The one in the middle is a bit cooler, I guess, isn't it? That's a sort of wheelchair for basketball and tennis, which I play. And then, on the right, you can see I can stand and walk with walking sticks, which is really useful. And I don't want to take that for granted. But the reality is, when you've got 2 walking sticks, you can't carry children or rucksacks or bags. So it functionally, it's not that useful. But it's, it is useful to get into a restaurant that has steps. So I go to the gym to keep it going. And I walk in the swimming pool to keep it going. I don't want to lose it. It's a really good thing. But the wheelchair is a large part of life. But again, there are people in the world who don't have any wheelchairs, and I've got 3 or 4 there. So there are things to be thankful for, even alongside the challenges. And God has provided is part of the testimony. Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. And then you mentioned earlier you're married with 2.
Yeah.
There's a parallel story here with Ruth. Fill us in on that.
Yeah. So the parallel story is that we had gone out before my injury. We met in central London. I mean, there's a really much longer story involving all sorts of messes that I made. But when the injury happened, we weren't together, and that was very hard for her when she heard the news. And Ruth would say, as I left, I just checked that she would. She'd want it to be heard that God has helped her to cope with the change. Marriage to me with a spinal injury wasn't what she had pictured, but she's found strength from God to cope with that new reality. And it took me a bit of time to get there, but 3 years after my injury, we got married, and we've had 2 children, Grace, who's 3 and a bit, and Tom, who's a couple of months old now. So it's been quite a story, and that part in God's kindness has ended happily. So that's ended happily, even though alongside that, for her, and I guess for the children as they grow up, there are some differences and some challenges to life, some less good moments, but things that we're genuinely able to be thankful for as well. So that's my story of how life has changed in the last 8 years. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Matt. You mentioned earlier you've got a verse to share with us.
Yeah.
Something that's encouraged you. I think we've got it on a screen. Jake's going to share it. And I'll give you a few minutes, Matt. You can just share us.
So shall I just read it? It's from Romans 8. Some who are used to the Bible would know this, others might not. It says, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? So they're great verses. These, just by way of sort of putting it in some context, these things there refers to all that's come in the chapter before, Romans 8, which is basically the present sufferings that we experience in this world, as well as the hope of the world to come beyond the grave. And it says, what should we say given all of that, in effect? And his statement is, well, if God is for us, who can be against us? That's his sort of rhetorical question. And so what he's saying is God is for us, and so nothing ultimately can be against us. And before someone's a Christian, we are against God. We're at war with him. In a general sense, God and us, he's against us, we're against him, if you could put it that way. He sends things like warnings in this world. I guess things like COVID are warnings to wake us up to a day when he'll come back to judge, when he will ultimately be against us if we're still against him. But in a general sense, even in spite of that, the Bible says that he is still, in a real sense, for this world. And certainly when we become a Christian, we really come to know that God is for us. We become children and he becomes our Father. So his point is that God is for us, and so nothing or no one can ultimately be against us. But I have to. But in suffering, and those watching will know this in different ways. That's really not what it feels like. Certainly, when suffering first comes into our life, it can really feel like God is against us. He's set his face against us. He's made life significantly harder. Maybe that's what it's felt like for us in the last year. It can feel like God is against us. And particularly when we look at the experiences of those around us as well, even if we're not suffering. I just think of if I just think of friends and family from the last few weeks or months, I can think of unexpected death at a young age, multiple repeated miscarriages, incurable brain tumor, just from close friends and family, let alone the unbearable suffering that we see and experience around it. And yet, so it doesn't feel like God is for us, and yet that's what the verse says. It says, if God is for us, who can be against us? And then what's the proof then? The proof positive that God is for us? Well, that's what the next verse is, verse 32. God, who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also graciously give us all things? When I was in hospital, a man who I'd never met, but who's since become a good friend, sent a postcard out of the blue, which simply said, I'm really sorry to hear what's happened. I'm praying for you. I want to encourage you not to judge God by your circumstances, which are a very bad guide as to what he's like. I want to encourage you to look at the cross where Jesus died for you, to see that is the proof that God loves you. And that was it's very helpful. I mean, I knew that, but it was helpful to just see it written down. And that's what this verse is saying, really, that the proof positive that in history, that we know that God is for this world, for us, for his people ultimately, is that he sent his son, so that whatever we think about how God runs his world, he took his own medicine, he came into this world. And I guess just to earth it, I have 2 children, as I've said, and I am for them, and I'm fiercely protective of them, and I would spare them anything. I would hold them back from any suffering I could prevent them from enduring. And yet the Bible says that God could have could have spared his son. He could have kept him up in heaven, but he chose not to spare him because he loves the people of this world so much that he gave his son to die on the cross under his judgment in our place, that we could be forgiven. So he must love us very much that he gave us his son. And I guess that's the place that I've looked to consistently in the last 8 years, when I've been confused, when I wonder what's going on, that I know God must be for me, because he wouldn't have bothered to give his son if he didn't care about us. So that, Andy, I think that's the place that I go to, and that's the place that Christians go to. We live by faith, not by sight. So it doesn't mean that we see, we understand. Just as as people stood by the cross on Good Friday, on their first Good Friday, it must have been very confusing. What is God doing? This looks a massive mess. And yet the Bible tells us that was the worst moment in history that God used for the best. So if God could do that then that gives me confidence, even though I don't understand what he's doing in my life and others' lives, that even bad things he can use for good, because he did that with the cross. So yeah.
Thanks very much, Matt, for sharing those verses and sharing your story with us.